We are about to get started. There we go. Okay, let us start the webinar. Until attendees can start joining. Great. So we'll just give it a couple of seconds. In the meantime, I'll just kind of welcome everybody today to the Fast Track to Fast, and it's brought to you by Video Elephant and dotstudioPRO. We are going to take time today to explore the viewpoint of OTT streaming into Fast. I think we have seen a good decade or more of growth in the streaming industry. And we've gone from infancy stage into kind of that teenage stage of streaming is the way I kind of like to look at it. And as we evolve, things are starting to heat up and we're really starting to see some real trends happen in the industry. So with that, I'm just going to introduce a little bit about what we will be talking specifically about today. And my name is Gonzalez. I will be your moderator, and we'd like to welcome you to the intersection of where content and technology are impacting the growth of our OTT streaming as we see our industry transition from a VOD catalog-based on-demand network with SVOD and TVOD into a fast streaming network where AVOD is really starting to, take front and center. This webinar is designed to give all of our attendees the opportunity to really walk away with useful tools. So we're going to structure it in a way where I'm going to introduce the panelists. They will talk a little bit about who they are. We'll go into our questions and the topics we're going to talk about. And at about the 20-minute mark, we're going to stop, talk a little bit about trends, and then do Q&A. At the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A section, so you can put your questions in there. I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining, and also pay attention throughout the session. We will be doing a couple of polls. So let's jump in. So let's get started, and let's first introduce Gavin Bridge. Gavin, thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm Gavin Bridge, the Senior Media Analyst at Variety's Variety Intelligence Platform Service. So that's a paywall business-focused analysis product that we have. Probably best known with all the work I do there for what I do in Fast, in particular the Life in the Fast Lane series. So we do reports on average once a year, perhaps more. Actually, it's going up. I'm doing one in a couple of weeks on International Fast. So maybe not as detailed, but going under the hood, getting really into like the trends within Fast and like just different stories that are kind of emerging to keep an eye on. So that, I guess, is why I'm here.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to introduce Mathias, and I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly, so please pronounce it if I'm not. Guille?
Guille, yeah.
Guille, there you go.
Thank you so much, Phoenix, for the invitation, and very honored to be with so many smart minds today. Yeah, my name is Mathias Guille. I'm with Broadpeak. I'm actually VP of Cloud Platforms. I'm leading our SaaS offering called Broadpeak.io, and we help any kind of content providers to build their fast channel, to personalize their experience to viewers. We do also a lot of dynamic ad insertion to help content provider to monetize their content. So again, happy to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining. Next, we'll move on to Dan. And Dan, I'm going to say the same thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. Gokumen.
Close. Yeah, it's like that H throws everyone off. So it's Goikman. So yeah, I'm Dan Goikman. Yeah. The H has been haunting me for a long time. Anyway, so I'm Dan Goikman, Chief Strategy Officer at Rewarded TV. Rewarded TV is a gamified streaming service where we work with content owners to, kind of gamify the TV viewing experience for consumers. We are, newer to the fast space, but act in our role here as a content distributor. Excited to be talking with all of you about how we see kind of the fast ecosystem evolving, and look forward to the conversation.
Perfect. Next, I'd like to introduce Dustin Wish. Dustin, thanks for joining.
Hey guys, thank you for inviting me. This is kind of a great meeting with longtime friends and some new friends. So thanks for being included in this kind of esteemed list. My name is Dustin Wish. I run the enterprise video solutions piece for Video Elephant. We're a content aggregator. We power everything from brands like MSN to anything in the DOA space like Rockbot, Loop Media, various others. We also have our own streaming platform and provide streaming, sustainable streams, and lots of other things around content to the whole FAST space.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Joe Pascual. Hi.
Hi. Really glad to be here. Thank you. I'm very proud to be help organize or host. I should say host. You organized all of it, Phoenix. Thank you. Appreciate it. But really glad to be here with everybody. I'm Joe Pascual. I'm the CEO and CTO of dotstudioPRO. dotstudioPRO is an OTT platform and distribution solution. Two sides to the business. The first side is providing technology as a backbone for platforms, streaming platforms like Local Now, Anthem Sports, Sports TV, and the Weather Channel. We basically provide a content management system as well as APIs and SDK app solutions for them to be able to launch direct to consumer. And on the other side of the business, we have a select team of traditional distributors that represent and champion content, select content in the ecosystem and broker deals with existing platforms, either clients of ours or other platforms, top platforms in the space that monetize content predominantly in the AVOD sphere. So that's basically what we do in dotstudioPRO, and really happy to discuss where FAST is going with all the fine gentlemen here and with you, Phoenix. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank all the attendees for joining. Cheers to you for showing up today on your lunch hour. So if you're stuffing your face, we totally appreciate that. We've got a good jam-packed hour. And again, my name is Phoenix Gonzalez. I'm one of the co-founders at dotstudioPRO. I head up and advise on the sales side and business development. So let's jump right in. So I really listened to my panelists and I really got to, think about how we wanted to craft this. So there's two segments of our conversation. The first segment, we're going to look at FAST channels. And the second half of the segment, we're going to look at FAST aggregation. I really feel like those are the two areas in this industry that we need to kind of look at and break down. So I'm going to start with the first question. I'm going to throw this out, and I think that I'll start with Dan, and then if anybody else wants to jump in, please do. So the first question that I really feel like is something important in the industry for us to look at is, how do I make my channels unique? Meaning that they get to stand out, and how do I choose a FAST provider to help me achieve that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think we're definitely at a point where, listening to various distribution platforms, talking to peers, trying to understand what content programming needs a distributor has become more and more important. I think we started, certainly a couple of years ago and in a past life, started talking to lots of content providers that, started to understand they had a need to be in the FAST distribution ecosystem, but did not, just creating a channel for the sake of creating a channel was not something that was going to scale and be super sustainable. So I would say, when thinking about programming a FAST channel, definitely, niche down, in my opinion, at this point, focus on where you can actually provide good breadth of content that you can reprogram and refresh on an ongoing basis, and really talk to distributors about what they're looking for. I think without having an understanding of what the programming needs, both editorially and seasonally, that a specific distributor is interested in, I think it's hard to stand out. It's hard to stand out these days. We approach things kind of differently. I mean, we as Rewarded TV, as a service that distributes FAST channels, we're looking things that kind of fit our demo, 18 to 45, slightly male skewing, audience. And we kind of, we look for long form movie content. We look for sports related content, sports adjacent content. And we find ourselves having to proactively seek channels and actually, engage in conversations, trying to make sure that we're bringing things that are appropriate for our audience. We've got a differentiated model, which I'm happy to talk about later at some point, to actually drive consumption that we believe is different than what those channels experience on in other spaces. But for us, it's almost like a reverse sell. We're selling why we're the right distributor for them. So it's kind of, I guess what that shows you, man, it's really a two-sided marketplace. They've got to understand what we need, and when we have to understand why it's helpful to trust an up and coming service. Right?
Perfect.
Yes.
Did anybody else want to jump in on that conversation, this conversation here?
Sure. Yeah, I think, I echo everything that Dan was saying. But also I think, what's interesting is that I think the space, as with any sort of disruption, a lot of times the technology and what's possible is what leads what happens rather than the actual quality of the product, right? And I think we've seen that, when you cut back to 2008, 2009, like everybody had there were 200 platforms out there all trying to compete with YouTube, and everybody was pretty much copying each other. And I think the same thing, when now we figured out that, we had the bandwidth to stream linear streams, and, we had technologies that actually take VOD content and stitch them together. And now you see the advent of that, where we have thousands of fast channels in the ecosystem, and a lot of them sort of mirrored on every single platform. So I think what's happening now is pretty much like going back to traditional television. What makes a channel survive and what makes a channel really good, and it really boils down to the programming. Is it speaking to a demo? Is it really speaking to the people? And what kind of unique voice does it have? So again, we're now full circle back to content is king. Where at the beginning everybody was trying to plant the flag in the space.
Well, that's interesting. So I think a good takeaway for the audience on that, if you're creating fast channels, and I heard something one of our panelists had said to me in a meeting that we had prior to this, it's what is your uniqueness based on the industry and the trends that are happening in the industry? Where is your uniqueness? And I think that is a really important conversation to be had amongst you and your teams as you're identifying to be a fast channel or not to be a fast channel. Let's move on to the next question. Thank you, guys. The next question is, once I've created fast, and I'm getting out there, there are three distinct things that I hear people in the industry talk about, and I wanted to kind of hear, each of you kind of talk about it. And one, it's what are the challenges that each and everybody hears people talking about when it comes to fast distribution? Because there are challenges, and I really want to see how we can help support everybody in figuring out how to kind of overcome some of those challenges.
So let me take a whack at that one, just because one of the things I see a lot from content creators now is, okay, how do we have enough content to meet this uniqueness refresh rate that really is going to drive, especially if I'm a content owner who doesn't have enough. Maybe I'm just starting out, maybe I have 50, 100 out, like it's enough to get close to doing a full slate block for a Roku or someone else, but it's not enough. Every Monday, Wednesday, Friday I need to see something different. And right. So that's where we kind of fill in the gap for sustainable streams. And what I mean by sustainable is adding additional content out of a library into your streams in order to achieve this kind of overall uniqueness and refresh rate to meet the genre needs of the platform. And so that's kind of where we fit in, because we help these smaller creators or other larger groups to then add additional content to it to really kind of meet that demand, which is a big challenge for those people that are just starting in the fast space.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's kind of like the evolution of fast, right? But you think like 4 years ago, you could have gotten away with a much lower content load, but the game keeps kind of going up. And my theory is almost like I've noticed in trends, right? Like a couple of services have really been trimming their content offerings in the last couple of months. And there's a change in how, I guess, success is being measured. I think that we'll see some of the channels that, not all of them, because there's those niche specialist formats that, because of the affordability of fast, will always be able to compete because they're able to monetize like their super fans. But I think in general, we'll probably see a world where what used to be channels may have to sort of either come together or be like just licensed content out to a bigger brand rather than run things themselves.
Yeah, I think just playing off, that and adding some additional context. I do think, as a content library owner, I think it is overwhelming from a set of technical choices that also have to be made. I think we're at a point where, especially as platforms are shifting their programming choices and trimming down their channel offerings, it becomes overwhelming if you kind of are a content library owner and are told by everyone around you that you need to have a fast channel. But the chicken and the egg problem of, getting distribution before having a tech vendor, and then figuring out what tech vendor to use, then figuring out what monetization model, what partner. Like, I think there's a lot of really important choices at the very beginning of that journey that can set you up to succeed or fail. And I think, probably as an industry, we need to do a better job of educating content libraries on those choices. Because, I think we see it all over the place. There's, a wide range of costs. There's a wide range of monetization options. And there's a wide range of preferred vendors for every kind of piece. So I don't know that there's been a great map made for this industry on how to navigate that, but that might be an opportunity.
That's a great, that's a great suggestion. I think being on the side of sales and talking with people all the time, I always hear, oh, how do I choose a partner? There's so many embargoes and you have to go through this platform to get on here, but then I have to go through this provider to get on here. And then I'm going to need to restream my content if I'm with this partner. There's so many things that people are traversing. It's like a landmine of unknowns. So I think that is a great suggestion, Gavin.
I was going to say, I'm seeing the variety map coming up pretty soon.
Well, that plus and then what happens to data, which would just be like a big load of pipes doing that and just everything coming out all messy.
Yeah,
very true. So that was it. That was great. Those are some really great takeaways from the idea of what are the challenges in distribution. Let's talk about the alternative ways to go about distributing my content, because, we started out with, okay, everybody just needs to create a channel and get it distributed. And I'm going to go through, the usual suspects of, frequency, Amagi, rural, I'm just going to give them my channel and get them to get it everywhere. But that's not where we are now. People are getting really creative. And I know that there's a lot of trends, not just in the US, even though the US has kind of been the trendsetter. So who wants to kind of jump into that? In terms of,
maybe I can jump right in, Phoenix. So actually, you were talking about the uniqueness of, building your fast channel. And I do believe it's also important to embrace your uniqueness with your distributors, right? If I take an example, very well, if you look at local now, it's all about local distribution, and you can really find your place there, right? I see right now also people moving away a little bit from the traditional distributors, the Roku, the Samsung, looking for alternatives. I think what I've been seeing in the last more or less 6 months is also like the traditional pay TV operators. They push away fast in the past and now they get into it. And I do believe that also it got tremendous potential if you look to get after local communities and show your content to local communities. So, I do think right now, the multiplication of distributors is an opportunity, especially if you try to develop your brand and develop your uniqueness. And coming back a little bit to what you were saying also on the technical issues, Dan, I'm 100% with you. I do think that right now there's a complexity in the way, not really to create a fast channel, because as Joe mentioned, the technical, really help to create on the fly new channels, but really for the monetization part, for the licensing part, there's definitely a complexity to manage all of that. And I think, the industry needs some answers on that. So,
oh yeah, I mean, not to mention the reporting part, which, we none of us grappled with. We all just started running in one direction, going okay, let's do it. And then now how do we actually report and, revenue share back to everybody that has a slice of the pie is I think that the next conversation that we're really going to be having, once the dust settles on all of this. But I think the other thing I think that's interesting is, from the content creator's perspective, you were talking about, Phoenix, what are the myriad options that I have, right? And I think you mentioned, do I just license my content as VOD assets versus do I build a fast channel? That question I think is very key, because, I tend to sometimes think of a fast channel as a mini brand. It's like you know, building your own streaming service is like the big kahuna. That's like the big bite, right? Like now, you know, you're on the hook for paying the lights, paying all the utilities, marketing, driving audience. But the flip side of that is that your brand gets, you know, brand recognition, you know. But I think a smaller bite-sized version of that is a fast channel. And you can hyper distribute your fast channel to all existing platforms, but it's branded as you. So it's like your first stepping stone to that, right? So I think that's one way to consider it if you want to go in that direction. But if it's a brand is not, you know, that important to you, sometimes it's more lucrative to take your on-demand content and plug it in into everybody else's fast channel. And, you know, we do that a lot in dotstudioPRO, where we're essentially distributing, you know, disparate VOD content to all the different platforms, and they in turn are plugging it into whatever hole they have in their lineup. And that could be a really easy entry point for a lot of people that are creating content.
I love it because I sit at the intersection on both those worlds, and another one, which is I even can take content in from other people and then relicense that out. A different team in the same organization, but the theory is the same, is that, you know, we can license that content and resell it. We can take it, we can build fast channels with it. We can in turn then take our own content and build channels that then go to platforms. So we get to sit at a great intersection of all these kind of models to meet those kind of business demands. So that's a great place to be.
Great. That actually jumps. So it's interesting, Joe, that you went there, because the next question, after kind of looking at alternative ways to go about distribution, is, you know, are fast channels lucrative versus VOD titles? Because that is really still a conversation that, you know, I find, me personally, I find when I go to a lot of conferences, I feel like we hear a lot of information, but we kind of glaze over those two topics. So I would like to just maybe dive into those two topics just a little.
I don't, are they necessarily like mutually exclusive, right? I think, you know, because, you know, I was going to build on the last point, Joe, that you made. I think, you know, we're at a point where, you know, certainly, you know, you need a strong refresh rate, and I like your point about, you know, just essentially using a fast channel as a, you know, widely distributed, almost like snackable preview to your brand, right? It could be your entire business, or it could be a small portion of your business that gets your brand widely known and accepted out in the marketplace. And I think, you know, to piggyback, you know, Phoenix, on your point, I don't think that these things are mutually exclusive. I think it's okay. I mean, I think it's important. Might even be table stakes to have both if you can have both. You know, I know on Rewarded TV, we have partners that are even in the form of other SVOD services, like you know, a partner of ours is FlixFling. FlixFling is a great example of an SVOD service that's focused on you know, long form movies across a variety of genres. Their SVOD is $8 a month, and they have their core user base they've been building on over a long period of time. We have an alternative distribution model. So in our world, there's a gamified streaming service. You actually can access and sell digital collectibles that drive access to content. With our service, you can buy a FlixFling collectible that'll give you access for a number of years to a rotating set of titles. I think it's about 100 movies we refresh quarterly from them. It got their brand out there. It generated net new revenue for them through the sale of the collectibles. And guess what? They also have a fast channel on our service where if you watch and you have one of those collectibles, you're getting additional perks and benefits. So that's unique to us, but I don't see why that would really work differently in all services, where you would have the ability to both have your VOD library and have a very specific, or maybe, you know, in the case of some of these larger aggregators, multiple channels that you can offer out into the world. And that really can become a core part of your marketing strategy.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that kind of varies based on where you launch geography wise, because obviously with fast CPMs drive this whole market. So you may launch multiple different business models depending on how you want to aggregate that content out.
Great point.
Yeah. That's, you know, it's the dollars, it's a dollars game at that point, especially outside of the US.
Yes,
Great point.
That's the issue with the global reporting though, right? Like I did it a week ago, I think, at Variety, where for the last possible time, because I think Paramount is no longer going to break out Pluto revenue, but you could calculate the ARPU for Pluto and guesstimate Tubi, because they give you a broad number, but not the full number. But because it's global, it was like, I'm not going to get these facts 100% right. It was like, say, $1.23 maybe per average per user per month for Pluto. Might have been a little bit higher, and about 108 for Tubi, which is still good. But like, you think if you could just show the US figure, that would be very helpful to kind of attract more people in, but you dilute it because you throw in all the international regions where it's not so high.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's actually interesting that you bring that up, because the next question, which is what I was just going to lob to you, was about domestic versus international, for, you know, like what networks make sense domestically and internationally. Because I think, you know, being here in the US, we're privy to a lot of what's happening in the US, but I don't think that there's enough conversation around what's happening internationally, and what platforms are, you know, how platforms are trending from domestic to international, as well as what's out there, because I think that's something that people need more insight into.
Well, if you asked me a month ago, I'd have been really stuck, but it's really handy. I've been preparing all these international presentations. So yeah, it's been really interesting looking into. First, I looked at Canada, Australia, and the UK, and I've just started looking into some of the European territories too. But what struck me with a lot of them is how they're prevalent. Only a couple of providers are, right? Samsung is pretty much everywhere. Pluto is moving into most places. Pluto doesn't exist in Australia, but it does. Paramount owns a domestic network, and some Pluto channels are on their fast service. Plex is in a lot of countries, right? And then you kind of have LG, but LG isn't in as many as Samsung, which I always found really weird, because LG launched 2 years ahead in this country than Samsung TV Plus did. Tubi's mainly AVOD internationally. Roku's in some areas, but not everywhere. Freeview's only in 4 international territories, I think, or maybe it's 3 or 4. So there's a lot of room for growth. And then you have Rakuten in Europe in particular, which isn't really spoken about here, but is a big player in Europe. Now, what is a big player in Europe, right? I was looking at some figures. Blue Ant put out a really cool report about 2 weeks ago with Omdia, and they had like a list of the size of what FAST is supposed to be in by 2027. The US is going to be worth $10.1 billion a year, right? Is the prediction. The next biggest market, the UK, is about 500 million a year. So even if you're a big player internationally, you really want to be here in the US, because that's where you're going to make the most money. But you know, on that note, like, there are channels who are kind of, and it's not just channels that you think of, it's not big name channels, right? Like, I was really struck by the fact that the Wu-Tang film collection, not the Wu-Tang Clan, the Wu-Tang martial arts collection, is everywhere. Afroland is everywhere. Like, there are these smaller, fast brands that are like they have embraced the international distribution that being on an international provider can give you. And they're literally all over the place, where AMC, Walking Dead channel, that's only here, right? Like, the only thing I'm jealous about is South Park channel is in Canada, but we don't have it in the US. So you do sort of see some of these cool versions, but it was interesting to see a lot of the smaller channels that I've noticed when I measure are actually doing a very good job of international distribution.
So Gavin, you think that this is for my own edification, really talking through this, is like, do you think this holdback is because it's infrastructure rolling it out to these, or content rights deals, or really the CPMs for the ad dollars are much smaller than some of these other, like, what do you feel is that factor that's inhibiting these larger companies from rolling it out, just like Afroland did?
Yeah, and let me throw regulation in there too. Is that also a driving factor? Yeah.
That, from what I've been told, regulation is a reason why Tubi in particular hasn't been able to kind of really go beyond the US for FAST in particular, because of how it does its advertising. But CPMs in like Australia, Canada, UK shouldn't be bad, right? Like, sure, if you're looking at like some of the South American countries and some of the smaller European countries, yeah, that's probably going to become more of an issue. I think part of it is TV, right? Like, if you think in the UK, for instance, they did a digital switchover for free TV in like 2000, they did it before I left, so before 2008, like maybe 2005, 2006. When I went back there last year, and I was in a house that had no internet and no cable. I literally only had an antenna. There's like 80 channels. It's like prototype fast. It's just the US never embraced it. Other countries did. So you have these models already that are difficult to kind of compete against. I mean, where fast can move in these countries is really embracing like the innovations like single series channels. You know, if you can get localized content that appeals to each region and just do marathon channels all day long for it, you'll begin to kind of help grow too. And then it just like ITV just did it, right? ITVX in the UK, that's only going to be limited to there, but they're really leaning into their own libraries. The same thing in Australia, that some of the domestic channels there are really leaning into their own domestic vaults. It's a kind of a pick and mix kind of strategy wise, but if you embrace it, I think people will come in. It's just, you've got to kind of also, you've got to take into consideration the behaviors, right? Like people were saying at MIPCOM last year, like France in particular has been really difficult to kind of crack fast just because of the TV habits that are in place there.
Yeah, I learned that actually recently from a consultant in the European market who said, you know, fast hasn't taken a hold, streaming hasn't taken a hold in the European market as much because cable is still really like the thing. There are great cable packages. People aren't, you know, like it's not like America where we're cord cutting and, you know, it's just
broadcast period too. I mean, 80 broadcast channels on rabbit ears is quite remarkable.
I think the US has been very advanced in code cutting and in proposing, you know, virtual NVPD to the viewers. But I think, you know, like the overall market is much more ready for fast, because people made that step already to get out of, you know, like the cable offering. So definitely in Europe, you know, it's a process which is ongoing. You know, you've seen in France, for example, you have an offering called Molotov, which is, you know, like very similar to what Fubo or Sling is proposing in the US. And I think it's getting, you know, like the viewer gets used to get a little bit out of the set-top box proposed by the pay TV operators. And they are going to be more and more open on fast, right? And I think also, it's also related to content, because you made a great point, Gavin, on the content itself. You know, I think in France, you know, being French, I know that very well. You know, we got a great access to American content, right? And on the other end, being in French in the US, it's very, very hard to get access to content from abroad, right? And I do think like it's an opportunity for a lot of brands to actually attack, you know, the US market and to propose their content to a different category of viewers, right? And so I see more potential as of today of being in the US for some brands that like for, you know, being in other markets such as Europe or APAC.
Great. Well, this is a good segue. I just want to let everybody know I do have the technology hurdles poll up. It's going to be closing in about a minute, and then I'll be launching the next one. But while that is going, I want to transition into this is for the network operator. So we talked a lot about the fast channel operators and the people who are creating fast channels. Now we want to talk about the on-demand networks. And if I'm an on-demand network, do I transition to fast? Do I add fast aggregation to my network? Is it worth it? And, you know, that's kind of where we want to start the next half of the conversation. Let's talk about networks now. So should I turn my on-demand network into fast or not?
Yes.
Sure. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. You should. Yes.
You absolutely should. Yes. I mean, we have a product for that.
Why?
But, you know,
Why should you? Because it's not an easy feat, right? So
no,
it's not just the technical aspect; it's the actual manpower and the resources to get the channel. Tell me why.
I mean, I could
go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, like, again, having spent the last, you know, several years in this space on the actual app building side and kind of helping, you know, helping content owners make these kinds of choices, now being in it, operating a direct to consumer service, I think it's about offering as much choice to consumers as you can, right? And so what's interesting about the fast market today, from my point of view, is, you know, there is a really strong volume of content out there that's available, that lots of content owners and programmers are thinking through and kind of making these editorial decisions about. And my point of view is if I'm able to present that and come up with a reasonable business model to bring that to consumers where they can choose between VOD and this now ever growing, rapidly growing set of fast channels, then I want to do that, right? And I want to, you know, I need to kind of be smart about how I employ tools to actually help drive discovery in that environment. And I need to kind of make it fun and interesting and different. And obviously, you know, as a owner, you know, I want to think about, you know, the fact that fast may very well monetize, certainly right now and possibly for the long term better than traditional VOD. So I think we're at a point where technology is allowing us to make this choice. And I think a lot of us, some of us even on this panel have talked about hybrid monetization models for channels. So I think it's smart to diversify your content offering, and there's going to be a lot of new and up and coming fast networks. Even now, there will be some that fail and there will be new ones that emerge. And now is the time to start building those relationships and take advantage of timing to really help build those brands and see if they work for you, in my opinion.
I'm going to actually, I want to lob this to Gavin, because Gavin, you actually review and you've been watching, I mean, you've been kind of there watching somebody go from on demand to fast, and, you know, do they have success? What are the things that are helping them make that success? So I'd love to hear from you, you know, based on what you've been seeing, like, do you think it's worth it?
Well, to be fair, I would change my answer depending on the business someone had. And I say this because if you have an SVOD service, I don't think you should have AVOD. I think you should have fast and SVOD. You should have a linear stream. Even I'll go to Peacock, right? When Peacock got the rights to The Office, yes, about 5-6 months ago, they launched a fast channel purely for The Office. Should have been the game from day one, because what you want to do is have a linear channel that's maybe out of sequence, or, you know, you can't pause, you can't record. You want to watch a channel, you want to watch an episode of something you like, go ahead. And it could work for a brand. It doesn't have to be a single series channel. But you want to watch specific episodes or follow along in order, you should pay for that and go to SVOD. So it could be a much better sort of dual revenue stream to work. When you have it on AVOD for some of that stuff, I mean, not everything. We think some of the older shows that have done very well on fast are also on AVOD. That necessarily shouldn't be the case. But I would say there has been a trend, first of all, in sort of more brands entering, like big brands entering the space. Really kicked off with Pluto being bought by Viacom at the time, and them putting their networks on. But I think I counted something like, this isn't the total number of channels, it's the total number of brands, big media brands with a channel is about 68 in the US at this point, and it was about 23 a couple of years ago. So, I mean, clearly they're seeing that there's a reason to have fast, right? And part of that is to sort of re-energize content. It's content that may not be stuff that people would seek out on SVOD, but it's also the need states. You know, as fast as grown, more people are kind of coming into it with the sense of, it may not be their number one sense of, you know, a system for entertainment, but it could be their number two. So you can't find something to watch, you're going to put fast on. You want to be where eyeballs are. And in my mind, you just, yeah, like I say, it depends on your business, but you should definitely, if you have the budget for it, go everywhere different, you know, types of viewers will be, because you'll only get more viewers if you're in more formats and more ways that people want to watch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Joe,
Yeah.
did you want to share on that?
Yeah, I mean, to answer your question, if the big platforms, I mean, the top big platforms that are SVOD are thinking going AVOD with fast, then that kind of answers your question, right? In the sense that, yes, I mean, I think, you know, this is a massive transition from the SVOD model to the AVOD model. And if you're going to go, and if you're a net new property or a property that's going into advertising monetization for the first time, then fast just makes complete sense. AVOD is the hardest thing. I mean, on-demand AVOD requires so much traffic, requires so much marketing, you know, versus fast, and the economics of how the cost is arbitraged as well is to the platform's favor when it comes to fast, you know, because I mean, let's let the cat out of the bag, right? I mean, they're aggregating fast channels whose bandwidth is being paid for directly by the channel creator, versus VOD, where, you know, you're shouldering bandwidth and you're shouldering hosting. So fast is like a no-brainer if you want to monetize through AVOD straight off the bat, you know. So I think, and I think, you know, that's why we launched, like, you know, products within dotstudioPRO to answer that, you know, in the sense that we kind of see that trend happening more. And, you know, when we're talking about the US market, and we were joking earlier about, slapping that iPad on the refrigerator, but I think, that's part of it too, right? We're all looking for more screens, and there's more and more channels being created. And I think the technology is being ubiquitous now, where, creating your own Pluto TV to make an analogy of what it is that, you can do, it's become a lot easier. And we certainly, have packaged that in a way now where the CMS portion of it, the aggregation portion of it, the metadata portion of it can be turnnkeyed, and you can launch your own Pluto, in a matter of minutes. So I think for a lot of platforms that have eyeballs and are switching AVOD or switching the ad model, I think creating your own FAST network is a no-brainer.
I think it's great we just asked that question, right? Because if you look at a couple of years ago, creating a channel was like such a, it was so complicated. And, we talk about the technicals and blah, blah, blah earlier, but definitely is definitely not the same budget today. If you want to start a channel today, like it's maybe 10 times lower than it was like 5 years ago, because you don't need to go through a big playout platform and like a big part of retranscoding and all of that. So the means to create a channels are actually way easier today than it was like a couple of years ago. So I just, not looking at the marketing and, the strategy that you may have, just having the capacity to ask yourself if it's a good idea. I do think it opened a lot of doors for a lot of content owners.
I'd like to dovetail on that real quickly, is that one thing that wasn't covered that I think is a new novel approach is actually doing pop-up channels. So you talk about how easy it is to create these channels. One of the things that we've had a lot of discussions around, like seasonality of channels, especially when it comes to maybe I don't have enough Christmas content to fill out a whole slate. So they'll come to somebody like us to help fill that out. But really, it's how do I address seasonal, special events, and how easy I can experiment with content, so I can just throw a fast channel for 6 months to a year and then kind of fade it into something else. Like you could turn these around very quickly versus, trying to market and everything for long tail. It really just gives you new choices.
Yeah, you got a really good example this month with Creed, right? The Creed channel on Freevee, just for the movie, just for 1 month, but fantastic promotional tool.
Right.
These are really great things. I feel like we could have a really long conversation about fast aggregation. I think I might have to do another webinar because we're only just getting started. But I do have the poll on fast channels versus fast aggregation open. I'm going to close it in a minute. We are going to move on because we do have to get to Q&A shortly. We're 2 minutes over, but I do just want to touch on, if you had a crystal ball, where is the market going and what should companies be focusing on? We've gone from on-demand and apps to fast, SVOD, AVOD, TVOD, all of those things. Where is the industry? Where do we feel like, if you had a crystal ball, what are the trends that we should be looking at before we go into Q&A?
Wow,
come on, hit me.
I feel like the answering questions like this is like career suicide these days.
No, it's really easy. All you say is, oh, an integer that I didn't know came about and no one could have seen it, so that's why it's wrong. It's great being a futurist.
Okay,
you need an out to answer that question.
I just took the political approach.
A couple of things.
I would say that you're going to see more, like there's more big brands getting involved, right? Like Netflix and Disney at this point are the only holdouts. Netflix is openly talking about it. Yeah. You're going to see everyone eventually kind of use it as the part of the modern day syndication model, right? Like that's where I kind of see fast being used. And at the same time, it's not to say the independent brands are going to go away, but you're going to see bigger brands coming in too, which will help legitimize it. I think maybe we'll be in a world where perhaps there aren't 18 channels dedicated to adventure sports. Perhaps there'll only be like 2 or 3 and they'll merge together and create something very, very powerful. Right. But we'll just see like bigger brands and more just helping to draw more viewers in, and then viewers who have an interest in an area will be like, oh, wow, I didn't know I could watch a channel geared around this. And kind of a floating tide really does rise all boats at this point. No, a rising tide floats. A floating tide would be insane.
Okay, I'll throw out a couple of things. Mathias, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, just very quickly, what we see, and it's a bit contradictory to what we said, but so fast is still early stage. Definitely, we see that like globally, but in some countries, and especially in the US, you can also start seeing some kind of like what I call fast fatigue, meaning like people, they are like, you know, they are intrigued at first and they go to fast channel and they start watching, and then at some point they get away or they don't come back to the same channel. So we see a little bit of fatigue. So I think also the industry is going to move to a little bit more personalization of the fast channels, meaning that like, you know, the schedule that you actually present to eyeballs, you can actually like really personalize them per user, right? Now you have the technical capacity to do that. You know, with BroadPeak, that's actually what we do. We change the schedule based on, you know, like the history of the user, his preferences, what time of the day it is, you know. So I do think that like to counter that fast fatigue, personalization is going to be a key component as well.
Great.
I have one more.
Go, yeah, go for it.
Better ads, not just the ads that we see, but better ad breaks too. Because you know how on some channels it like cuts you. They don't even use the ad breaks from the TV show. They just like cut the host in half and then come back. And then the dead air that we have. I mean, it is nice when there's logos. Sometimes it's better than like nothing. But I think we'll see a better use of co-promotion, maybe people doing any, or you'd have to have a load like 50, 60 promos probably to fill it all, to make sure you're not showing the same stuff over and over again to repeat the mistakes of CTV. But I think we will see a better embrace and sort of maybe people will just put themselves in the user's perspective, and that will help kind of raise that. But once we see that, I think we'll kind of be on the next stage of fast growth.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you, wonderful gentlemen, for sharing your insights and your expertise. I will recap at the end. We do have some questions coming in now, so I want to honor the people who have been listening. I did put up a poll about trends. I ended the other one. So if you want to share your insights on trends as well with the group, I'll share it as well to the group after some trends polling answers come in. But in the meantime, this one comes from, and I won't mention people's name, I'm going to leave them anonymous. But as a content creator or content producer, I have to finance new episodes on my own. When will I be able to incorporate product placement to help offset production costs? Can I bring to the table a national advertiser? Well, that's a great question. Well, I mean, I think that correct me if I'm wrong. And if the person who put this up wants to expand and say yes or no, are you talking about in relation to like when you get to the distribution point, you want that national advertiser to be a part of it and you want those platforms to accept your advertiser in your programming? Go ahead. You guys can answer while.
I mean, those are two different things. I mean, I understood it as like he wants to bake in a national ad into his programming and then sell the fast channel with that, you know, that ad offsetting his production costs, right? So then that becomes a conversation to the platform that he's distributing to, because in all likelihood, you know, they will want to revenue share on that advertising.
I think I mean, it's a very specific question, but I do think we've seen all forms of this already in traditional media. So it feels to me that, you know, this is something that's likely coming down the pipe as more and more brands come into the space and become aware of fans. I don't see this that necessarily being all too different from, you know, sponsored content or really branded content. Branded entertainment, I think, is probably the appropriate.
You see that with some of the channels, right? Like I know I've written about how Pluto is really the only one to do it so far, but they do the sponsored takeover of the name. So it will be like PBR Ride Pass brought to you by Tractor Supply Co. or one of the Nickelodeon ones brought to you by a toy company. And that's one other way of branded. But like I know, I won't say their name, but a fairly big independent fast channel creator with originals, they have branded content on there all the time. They have partnerships and they do it in such a way that you can't even, it's so perfect. It's not like when, was it Chipotle had that show on Hulu about 10 years ago? It's very obviously just a Chipotle commercial that was 20 minutes long. It's not like that anymore. So I think if you could get someone in, no one's going to, like, as long as you're not being, you know, very insulting to the audience's intelligence, no one's going to say no to that kind of content.
What about, there was a network, I think they must still be around. There was the Wrangler network, right? Which was Wrangler Jeans, and they had an entire rodeo network, right? So I think that's a great example of, that
Right.
being.
It's just going back to the 50s when Ovaltine used to sponsor the Howdy Doody show. Not that I'm old enough to remember this, but it's funny that these things just continue to, the new models continue to come around.
Yeah, but I think to that person's question, I think if they're, I'm putting myself in their shoes, like if I'm a single creator or a content owner and I create my fast channel, like how do I navigate distributing that if I have baked in ads myself, right? Like how do I, and there are obviously some technological hurdles in there. If it's bypassing server-side ad insertion and reporting, how does that conversation now transpire with, let's say, Roku or Pluto TV, if they're interested in that channel?
Well, some of the platforms will do direct play, like in a revenue split scenario, you may do one of two avenues, which is a set of programming that you may bake it in, which is I think kind of what we talked about originally.
Yeah.
Then you can also work in however your SSP back inside, to add direct sell inventory, which you can do. Some platforms allow it, so it just depends. That's a platform to platform, question.
So it's a negotiation essentially.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, next question to come in is, in terms of, and I think this kind of really speaks to like content, and, Dustin, you touched on it before, but the question is really, what is the best way to go about getting access to more fast channels? And, where do I go to get more fast channels?
The Video Elephant. That's where you.
Yeah, that's easy.
Right.
You come to us. Well, we set you up. I think it just depends, right? So it's an interesting intersection for me because I also now I'm talking to partners that I would have been competitive with before because everybody's looking at how do I actually blend content together to stand up my own, as Joe said, white labeled Pluto solution, which you guys offer a technical solution as well for. And how you do that. So we're just a piece of that equation, which is the overall content. And maybe you create a custom channel with us. Maybe you have some of your own. Maybe we're taking yours and blending it with ours. And you're creating, like, there's all these other different ways to create the platform. But at the end of the day, you still need a client. You still need a backend to manage some of that stuff. That's where solid technical partners like dotstudio can fit into that equation and then help actually create a full baked solution that could be their own. That's kind of the way in my head.
Awesome. Well, that's great. So we have a couple minutes left. If anybody else has a question, please feel free to ask. I did post the last trend. It looks like for trends, which we're going to go a little more into those with Gavin. When it comes to trends, I put up two things. I asked gamification or personalization. Where do you feel like fast is going in 2023? And personalization won out. So at a 91%. So people really feel like right now personalization is where it's at in 2023. Now, I want to take a couple minutes, Gavin. You have been such a thought leader in the industry when it comes to what's going on, who's succeeding, how people are doing it, really tracking the trends. So are there insights and things you want to share with content creators, owners, and networks that you feel like would be good and useful information when it comes to the trends?
Well, gosh,
I'm putting you on the spot.
where can you begin? Definitely there's, the key thing I think that I've noticed is how just the number of channels per provider has exploded, right? Like you compare it to like 2 or 3 years ago even, and the average one now is probably like 200, if not more. There's so many that are close to 300, some are at 400. That gives you options. But the interesting thing has been the relative slowdown in total available channels. That was like last year was kind of zooming up. It actually dipped by 2 in January this year, which was the first time in 12 months the number of total channels available actually fell, or at 2 out of, that's like not even 1%, but and then it went up to about 1,631 or 33 in February. What that says is that there's bigger, like the way to kind of succeed, I think, is really almost to kind of club together in some areas, to create like mini networks out of different content. It obviously depends on the type of content, but in terms of like other trends, like we're seeing, like at the moment, there's really nothing available for Gen Z. right? I think a couple of channels just started to kind of stitch together stuff from social, but there's nothing that really speaks to it. So I've used this line a lot now. Like when people say that FAST is younger than TV, it's because the average age of TV is like 70 and young is me in FAST because I'm a millennial. And they're just like, oh my God, it's like, you know, they're not 55. This is great. But it's not like people who are in their 20s. I think there's going to be a real opportunity for brands to kind of embrace the content that younger people are watching. And then, I mean, if you follow the work I've done, I mean, I wrote about it again 2 or 3 weeks ago. In particular, there's a lot of Hispanic culture represented, like Spanish language channels are available, really very much so in FAST. But there's a very small amount of Black culture focused channels, and I think we're going to see more of an embrace of different underserved groups now because the scale is there. So especially if you have content for an interest or a group that isn't necessarily represented very well, then FAST is going to be a much better way to kind of embrace that. So the trend, and yes, after the first time I wrote about it, 5 months later, a lot of people suddenly released their own channels on that side. So I don't know if that was just coincidence or a little helpful push, but we will see, I think, more of that happen. And then, I mean, finally, personalization is something that I've heard for, I don't know, like 2 years at this point. Every time I end something, but oh, AI is going to come in. We are seeing that to some degrees already, right? Like there's some content that's based upon geography that, depending on what platform you use, like Samsung is really good at this, and they're not the only ones, but on Samsung TV Plus, they might have about 30 to 40 local channels, but you'll only see the one that's nearest to you, right? Like in their news thing. Whereas local now has about 150, but you have to scroll through the whole list. And they have their reasons for that, which is fine. Yep. And I agree with them. Like they've found people, you know, you might want to watch news from your old town. You can't do that if it's geo location based. But the AI recommendation will be really great for discovery of new content to kind of remonetize and keep people in and, you know, just watch for longer. So I feel like now that the world has kind of blown up with ChatGPT and the Bing stuff and everyone's all AI, that we may really see that kind of come in this year, which would be another new, like, what would that be, like Gen 5 maybe for FAST based off of the report. So yeah. Did I leave any trends off you'd like me to talk about?
No, that's great. We got another question that came in. I want to honor him before we finish. We have 4 minutes left. I want to take 2 minutes and answer this question. So let me just read it out loud. Thank you for submitting it. Hearing all about platforms and that they want fresh and original fast programming for their or fast first content from their partners, but the financial model for fast doesn't really support this in a sustainable way. Do you think there is bigger players jumping into the space? Do you think as bigger players jump into the space, the financial model will change to be more favorable for the content owner like cable was? Oh, and now we have all kinds of questions coming in.
You always wait till the last minute.
So do you guys think that the financial model will change and be more in favor of the original content creator?
Yeah, I mean, my take, I think, you know, in general, you'll see costs. I mean, obviously, costs continue to decrease. And I think as monetization shores up, meaning we understand who's responsible for it, reporting on it is better and faster. There's no hidden fees, right? Everything's transparent. And that's obviously, I mean, big part of what we're working on as well. As long as, you know, once visibility improves and the cycle to understand revenue improves, and monetization improves, I think all those costs go down, and you become, you know, I mean, you should have deals that are much more favorable to content providers, right? I think it's just necessary now because we were in a world where we were asking content providers to take a lot of risk. I mean, we asked them to, you know, we convinced them to, you know, build these platforms and build these channels without a really well-rounded understanding of what the upside potential is relative to the cost. So if all of a sudden you're getting big streaming bills and no revenue behind it, that's scary. Yeah, so I think that we'll see as we get more and more transparency and costs decrease. I think you'll see much more favorable and differentiated models emerge.
Great. To the person who's asking when the recording will be available, I am going to be sending out a thank you follow-up. You will get a link to the recording, so that'll be coming out. So everybody who was on here will get a link. And then there was one other question. We got 1 minute left. And I think that how does having fast channels help me raise money for new content? He is a Gen Z producer. And he's asking if he can explain it to a fifth grader. I think because we have 1 minute, if you want to email me, I would love to work with you on this question. And I can also say that all of these gentlemen here, they are on LinkedIn. If you want to reach out to them and, LinkedIn them to have your own discussion with them, we will have more of these webinars. I just want to take a moment to thank our panelists for joining today. This has been a really great conversation. And I really, I love the fact that we had a fast aggregation technology expert from the dotstudioPRO team. We had fast content aggregation from the Video Elephant team. We had a personalization person who is a trendsetter and in the Broad Peak team. Thank you, Mathias. We also had Gavin, who really is shoring up trends and what's happening in the market globally and domestically, and Dan, who is a fast channel owner, but a network owner. So he's come from the technology side. So there was a really great meeting of the minds of technology trends. Shouldn't I hope that you all got a lot of information out of this. I'm going to follow up again, as I said, with an article with the video, and we're here to help and support.